Welcome. I'm Genevieve Cullen, President of EDTA, and I want to thank you, EDTA members, guests, and press for joining us for April's Leader Series event, which is entitled Speeding Electrification of the Commercial Fleet. While passenger cars seem to get the lion's share of attention, we at EDTA know that trucks and buses are an equally critical component of a fully electrified transportation sector. Technology advances and product offerings are expanding to meet the diverse duty cycles of commercial vehicles. And Washington is poised to make an unprecedented investment in infrastructure. Recently, the administration called for $2 trillion of investment in infrastructure that includes $174 billion directed toward electrifying transportation. That includes $45 billion for electric school and transit buses, $10 billion in medium and heavy duty vehicle purchase incentives, and $15 billion for 500,000 charging stations. That proposal is just the beginning of the congressional process to turn priorities into policy. So today's discussion with industry experts is an extremely timely examination of where medium and heavy duty opportunities are and what new business models and heavy duty opportunities and policies can be accelerated. Our program today includes market analysis from Guidehouse, followed by a moderated discussion with representatives of leading players in e-mobility for commercial fleets. There'll be time for questions after both segments, so we look forward to an informative exchange with our members. If you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. I think your name should appear with the, when you type it in. If it doesn't, please identify yourself in the question. Again, today's program is being recorded and will be available after today on YouTube. I think we can get underway. So to open the discussion, I want to welcome Ajay Chawan, Associate Director at Guidehouse, formerly known as Navigant. Ajay provides clean transportation strategies to organizational clients. And prior to joining Guidehouse, Ajay served as the production launch manager for the Nissan Leaf and electric mobility program manager at Audi of America. So we are really anxious to hear what he says, and we actually have a long history working with Ajay and looking forward to his strategic insights into the medium and heavy duty segment. Ajay?
Great. Hey, Genevieve, thank you very much for the intro. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well. First of all, can everyone see the screen that I'm projecting? Hopefully I'm sharing that. Hold on, let me share that if it's not sharing already. Okay, share.
There you go.
All right, excellent. So again, thanks everyone for tuning in today. As Genevieve said, my name is Ajay. I'm a member of the Mobility Solutions team at Guidehouse, formerly known as Navigant Consulting. So in this role, our team focuses on the growing overlap between the electric utility sector, where Navigant is traditionally strong, and the transportation sector that is rapidly becoming more electrified. One of the areas that we look at, or that we're seeing increased activity in, is the area of commercial vehicles. So what I wanted to do today is share some of our team's viewpoints on the current state of the market, where it's heading, and talk about a case study that we recently completed. All right, so yeah, those are the three topics that we will go over today. So first of all, I'll open by saying that commercial fleet electrification is a very hot topic these days. One of the key drivers for this is the fact that there are commitments from many commercial entities to decarbonize. So the term decarbonization is a larger umbrella that's been, or a larger force that's been pushing entities who are seeking to meet their corporate sustainability reporting requirements. So transportation emissions, as we know, represents about 1/3 of CO2 emissions, making this category a very attractive candidates to look at for reduction opportunities. So that's part of why we're looking at commercial fleet electrification, the commercial transportation sector. And so now I'd like to get into a little bit more about how do you define what commercial fleet electrification, what does a commercial fleet look like? So every year in the US, there are about 1.2 million commercial vehicles sold. And these vehicles span the gamut from class 1 through class 8. And so class 1 through class 8. And the image you have up on the screen is how many folks think about the industry, going from class 1 through class 8. One of the shortfalls of this point of view is that it significantly oversimplifies the market, and as a result of that, the vehicles in the middle boxes of classes 3 through 6 and bleeding a little bit into 7, you miss out on a lot of potential, the granularity in those spaces, and then you may oversimplify the market and not see the opportunities that are truly there. So the way that our team has looked at the market is a slightly different way, where we will look at basically a progression of 3 filters. We start off with what are the key markets to look at, and we call them like the freight market, the vocational market, and then the transportation market. We'll then look within the 12 segments within this market. And then from those 12 segments, we further divide it into 50 subsegments. And by doing this, we're able to get down to the very specific use cases within the commercial fleet of those 1.2 million vehicles that are sold every year, and identify what are the good opportunities for electrification, as well as identifying what currently are not, which classes today are not good candidates for electrification. In the orange boxes, you'll see the segments that we've identified as having strong electrification potential. So we've identified them as the for-hire segment, the private fleet segment, leasing, and then in the passenger market for a transit and the pupil segment. So so what I want to do then is take a deeper look into a couple of these segments to see where some of the growth opportunities are. And the data I'm going to share with you is from a recent report that our team published on the commercial bus and truck market. So what we're projecting, as you can see in the two charts, that the projected growth for electric delivery vans, electric buses is expected to grow at about a 40% CAGR over the next 10 years. So we'll start. We'll look at each segment a little bit more closely. So starting with delivery vehicles. Many delivery vehicles, I should say, are great candidates for electrification for a variety of reasons. These reasons include their predictable limited miles driven on a daily basis, as well as the fact that they return to a depot after their shifts. Several manufacturers have been looking to, or have developed and announced products in this space, including Daimler, Rivian, Peterbilt, and Navistar. We've seen several press announcements about these vehicles entering the market, and again, going back to the earlier reason of why these vehicles have been developed and brought to market, is that the customers for these fleets are looking to decarbonize. Examples in this space are companies like McDonald's that has made a commitment to decarbonize, to reduce its carbon emissions, has organized its logistics suppliers to help to reduce the carbon intensity of its supply chain, which can then be reported up to the carbon emissions from McDonald's corporate. We're seeing this as well as we're seeing this throughout the market with national brands that are sporting good apparel manufacturers, food and beverage manufacturers, and other national and multinational brands that are seeking to achieve their corporate sustainability targets. The second category I want to talk about is buses. There's been significant action from large transit agencies to electrify their fleets, and the push to electrify their fleets has been driven very much by regulation. So several states have made commitments to reduce their carbon emissions. Part of this was their desire to meet the goals that were outlined in the Paris Accords from 2015. and they've continued to remain committed to these commitments. Given the large number of transit buses in the larger metro markets such as New York, San Francisco, Boston, and Chicago, the transit vehicles represent a significant opportunity for emissions reductions. And as a result, several bus manufacturers have been developing products to support these transit agencies. These manufacturers include BYD, Proterra, and Volvo. And the activity that my team has been, some of the activities my team members have been focused on is helping these transit agencies navigate that process of how do we convert our primarily diesel fleet to an electric fleet over, say, the next 10 or 15 years, given the timelines that have been given to them by the state governments. The good news for both of these opportunities, they tend to be funded mandates. So not only is the directive set either by the corporate board for delivery vans or for transit agencies who are getting money from the state, from the respective states to achieve these goals, that in turn drives market demand for these vehicles. And we see this activity continuing to increase over the next several years. I want to then talk about a specific case study, which will then, I think, tee up one of my fellow presenters with regard to electric buses, or school buses in particular. So the use cases for school buses make them very attractive for both vehicle electrification as well as using these mobile assets for grid resiliency. So we know the typical pattern of a school bus is how it works. It'll run in the morning. It'll typically return to a base. It'll make some runs in the afternoon, and then return to its base during the school year. Some of the buses may be used in the summer, but many of them sit idle in school bus garages. The attractiveness of the school bus market for electrification has been drawing a lot of investment. One of the challenges that many organizations have for electrification is the initial cost of entry. The price of an electrified vehicle is a factor or two or more, in some cases higher than that of the conventional vehicle. The savings come from the ongoing operations, where the TCO of an electrified vehicle is often much less than that of a conventional ICE vehicle once you get past that initial investment. Given the attractiveness of the use cases for school buses, again, significant private money has been coming into this market in order to offset that initial purchase price, and then realize the savings from the ongoing reduced operating expenses. So in this case, our client was looking to invest in the electric school bus market and wanted to understand what are the potential revenue opportunities by using that bus as a resiliency asset. So specifically, they wanted to look at is there a business case to be made by using electric buses as a bidirectional source of power to the grid. And so what our team did is we actually modeled out the various business cases that could be or the use cases that exist for electric school buses, which could be used as synchronized reserves, energy arbitrage, and frequency regulation. And what we found is that there is definitely a market for these, a positive business case for using school buses in this manner. There are several conditions that need to be met, of course, and those conditions vary significantly based on the local market that the buses will operate in. At the end of the day, this particular client chose to move forward with this business opportunity, and we see more activity in the space continuing to happen. So, in short, the demand for commercial fleet electrification, we see it continuing to grow. We expect it to grow as strongly, if not more strongly than we're currently projecting it to grow. This growth is being driven by demand by commercial entities, by government agencies, and then funding from government agencies will continue will continue that cycle, which will then encourage vehicle manufacturers and producers to develop and produce more vehicles. This continued growth is going to continue to attract additional sources of capital, or multiple sources of capital, especially from the private sector, which will then fund the fleet transition and the continued decarbonization of the overall transportation supply chain. So with that, Genevieve, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you, Ajay. Appreciate it. I think these are all really compelling statistics about this market opportunity, and I think it's also very important for folks to see that visual of exactly how many segments, how many duty cycles need to be served by these technologies. We'll give the folks in the audience a chance to ask some questions too, but if I can just start. Can you talk a little bit? So you note that you're charting in some cases, a 40% combined growth over the next, by 2030, was that?
Yeah, 10 years, correct.
10 years, yes. And so what is the most significant driver? I know that you were saying it varies by segment, but what do you think is the most significant demand driver in the marketplace today?
We're seeing a lot of it. I think the ultimate driver is consumer sentiment. So what's happening? A larger percentage of the U.S. population is asking more questions about where their products and services come from, and that in turn is putting pressure on the global brands that are providing those products and services. The examples I mentioned earlier from the food and beverage industry, the apparel industry are two of the large sectors that are multinational, but they don't own their supply chain. They have third-party logistics providers that move goods from all over the U.S. via truck. For the clothing manufacturers, they have large supply chains that start from Asia and move all the way to the U.S. via ocean freight or air, and then those get shipped distributed via multiple modes. Mm-hmm. So these corporate brands are seeking to reduce their carbon footprint because their customers are asking for that.
Oh, that's interesting. And do you see that dynamic changing as the greater value propositions become more obvious, as you talk about sort of the V2G potential for these vehicles? Could the demand start to be driven closer to from inside or from the bottom up inside a sort of a fleet owning agency?
It could be. So you have a large variety of fleet owners with different, or fleet managers and operators with different motivations. If you can, the challenge here is or the trick I should say, is to identify or make it a win-win situation where the fleet manager or the fleet operator, they need to make sure that their vehicle will do what it's supposed to do. It'll fulfill its primary duty cycle. If we can demonstrate it'll meet your needs and potentially save you money and or potentially make you money on top of that, that's a win for them. But it's really about fulfilling that primary use, which is moving goods from point A to point B. The other benefits are again supplemental.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's one of the differences we see in looking at the consumer vehicle market and the commercial vehicle market. There are a lot of elements involved in a consumer's purchase that just don't factor into a fleet manager's calculations, right?
One of the things we often tell folks is from a commercial vehicle conversion standpoint, it's very much an economic decision. If we can demonstrate favorable economics, they will go in this direction. Consumers, there's an emotional attachment to the vehicle. Many consumers name their vehicles. Most folks don't name their delivery truck.
Well, if there's anybody in the audience who wants to provide any of their, the pet names for their delivery trucks, please, put it in the chat. So we've talked about, the demand side of this. Can you speak to a little bit about what the supply side? Do you see any challenges in the infrastructure or the component side that would interfere with this scaling the medium and heavy duty segment?
It's the overall challenge that we see right now. It is the scale, it's the supply chain overall constraint of production capacity and all the elements that go into that. And there are other folks who can speak more knowledgeably about specific components like batteries and so forth. From the discussions I've been in, like there's that there should be sufficient supply to meet the demand, but it's the ramp up curve is what's unknown right now. So there are very aggressive targets today to meet some decarbonization objectives, and so it'll vary. It just varies by use case. But overall, we see the projections that we've shared earlier take into account the upstream elements as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I'd like to just one more question, because it speaks to I think what our next panelists are going to touch on as well. So you looked at particularly sort of this value proposition of V2G. Could you just take a quick second, just in case there's folks on the call who are not conversant in what that means, and do you see that having a wide applicability throughout all those duty cycles, or is that going to be sort of a limited potential revenue stream?
I think it'll be more limited as of now, mainly because of the use cases for the vehicles. Again, the vehicle's job first and foremost is to move stuff from point A to point B. So the V2G opportunities are, I would say, they have to be done when the vehicle is not doing its primary cycle. The school buses I think are uniquely qualified for V2G because of their primary use cases. For other delivery vehicles, V2G will continue to look at it, but it's not the reason to get into vehicle electrification. The primary reasons are reducing your overall total cost of ownership, and while total cost of ownership, reducing your carbon intensity while maintaining your level of service.
Okay. Thank you. Ajay, I really appreciate that. And for those of you who didn't get to the chat in time, Ajay has agreed to rejoin us at the end of the discussion. So if you have questions for him, you can he'll be available at that after our next panel discussion. Thanks, Ajay. Much appreciated. Okay. And so I now have the pleasure of introducing our industry panel, where we are really pleased to have two experts from companies who are leading electrification in the medium and heavy duty segment. Representing Bluebird, we have Kevin Matthews, who's the Managing Director of NSI's Energy and Environment Sector and Executive Vice President of the Legislative Practice, where he advises clients on clean energy and water projects. Kevin is the project manager of Bluebird's DOE grant to build and deploy zero-emission V2G school buses. And representing Eaton Corporation, we have Dr. Mihai Dorobantu, Director of Technology Planning and Government Affairs for Eaton's Vehicle Group. In this role, Mihai is responsible for technology strategy and implementing it through technology development and on to proof of concept. His expertise includes, but is not limited to, engine and powertrain systems for commercial vehicles, electric and hybrid propulsion, and high voltage power management. Mihai serves on the 21st Century Truck Partnership Executive Leadership Team, as well as several other national transportation boards. So gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. And can we just begin? I'm going to ask you each to give our attendees just an introduction to your work in electric truck and bus technologies and your insights into the opportunities that you see. So Kevin, why don't you start off as I'm building on Ajay's discussion on V2G. And again, feel free to explain what V2G is for folks who might not know.
Right. Thanks, Genevieve. And really thank you for the invitation to be here today to represent Bluebird in this electric vehicle space, and particularly for the customer end of the equation. For those who don't know, Bluebird is one of the leading school bus manufacturers in the United States and has led since 1927 when we started our business in Fort Valley, Georgia, where it continues today with over 2,000 employees building very safe school buses, because our primary duty is to transport students safely every single day of the week. But we extend that safety not just to the frame of the bus and crash protection, things that you normally, but also emissions. Very high concern about that. Bluebird sells more alternative powered school buses, meaning CNG, propane, and electric than its competitors combined. And we've been the first to market with electric, with CNG, and propane to bring to our customers and the students they transport. In the electric arena, believe it or not, we started in 1994. The Atlanta Organizing Committee of the 1996 Olympics asked us if we could provide zero emission transportation for athletes and attendees of the Olympics. And so we built them using lead acid battery technology. As you know, didn't go well. The buses served the 2 weeks of the Olympics, but after that, things kind of trailed off in a hurry. But we learned a lot from that. And realized the technology needed to come forward more. So in 2017, we launched our second generation product, school buses in the type A, C, and D category. And those who know school buses, the type A's are the short ones that hold under 36 passengers, and the C's and D's are the big ones that you normally think of when you see school buses. And so as of today, we've delivered or have on order over 400 of those electric school buses. And that's our fastest adoption ever. On alternative power, when you consider CNG and propane, the electric's actually adopting faster than those vehicles did. So we're very excited to see that prospect come along. Electric is going to be core to us going forward, as Genevieve mentioned. Very excited by the legislation on Capitol Hill, and that the Biden administration is proposing around to support a $20 billion plus program to bring electric school buses to more communities across America. Primarily, our market has been California, where they're heavily subsidized by the California Air Resources Board, the California Energy Commission, and various air quality management districts around the state do that. But we have delivered units to 15 states, and that includes cold weather states, North Dakota in particular, where we've partnered with some utilities and some school bus manufacturers so we can learn and they can learn what cold weather is going to mean. And we can talk about that down the road as well. And as Genevieve mentioned, we're the leaders on vehicle to grid. We are the first to develop and really sell a commercially viable vehicle to grid product. This is not experiments, demonstration project. This works with our partners and do that. And we had our first commercial deployment 2 weeks ago in Picton, Illinois, partnered with the utility and our partner Nuvy to make that happen. Be happy to go into details if people want to do that, but I know we're kind of time constrained. So Genevieve, I'll stop here. We can move on.
Great, thanks, Kevin. I appreciate that. There's a lot we can dig into. But first, Mihai, can you tell us about what's happening at Eaton?
Sure. Hello everybody, and I just want to start by thanking Genevieve for organizing this session. Quickly introduce Eaton. We're a $21 billion company worldwide, 97,000 employees. Our DNA really is to manage power, be it electrical, mechanical, and do that efficiently, safely, and reliably. We actually started in 1911, so this is our 110th anniversary. And we started in the commercial vehicle space by selling 8 truck axles in 1911. We're a bit bigger than that. Today, we really have 2 sectors at Eaton, an electrical sector and industrial sector, which normally is of interest to analysts, but not necessarily to this audience. But today, in particular, this is important. Our vehicle business, including its e-mobility division, is roughly 15 to 20% of Eaton revenues. But we do benefit a lot in terms of technologies and scale from the electrical sector. The electrical sector is really focused on infrastructure, which is why it's an interesting discussion today. Now, relevant to our topic today, our track record is really in electrifying vehicles, especially in the commercial vehicle space. We built upon our high efficiency transmissions. Really, that was and many people, perhaps not in this call, know Eaton really for those transmissions, but we were the first to productionize hybrid systems for commercial vehicles as a business in 2007, and we have, I believe, over 10,000 systems now sold worldwide. We pioneered the multi-speed transmissions for heavy-duty electrical vehicles, which really makes electrification, electrical powertrains, a realistic technology in heavy-duty. And then a couple of years back, we built our e-mobility business, which in itself builds both on the traditional hybrid and electric vehicle programs that I talked about, but also brings in the power electronics competencies and safety competencies that were developed in the stationary world in our electrical sector. The other leg of our business in Eaton is the EV charging infrastructure. So we've recently, for example, we've upgraded a partnership with the charging equipment providers in Europe, and that's only part of our focus on infrastructure. Eaton has been developing technologies to manage microgrids and distributed energy ecosystems, and those competencies really fit in well with the growing needs on charging infrastructure. For us, this is quite a unique position because we play in two evolving segments. So vehicles is part of the transportation segment, and the EV infrastructure is part of the energy system. And until now, these segments, transportation and energy, have evolved really pretty much independent of each other, and they were relatively self-contained. But with vehicle electrification, which is driven, as Ajay said, by decarbonization needs, that couples the two sectors. So going forward, the vehicle design space boundary is no longer self-contained, or it's not longer set just by logistics and road and driver demographics, but it is also set by the energy infrastructure. And that means that decisions on the vehicle side and on the charging infrastructure side cannot really be independent of each other. And that is a new world. And those who want to serve this market will have to take advantage of these interactions. And I think we're seeing it in the bus segment, I think the school bus segment as well. People found it easy to sell their first 1 or 2 vehicles, but difficult to sell 20 or 50 at a time at a facility because of the infrastructure barriers. And in that segment, I think the market has already reacted, and most of the players have formed partnerships with traditional infrastructure people so that they can go to their customers who are not really vehicle OEMs and not really fleets, but maybe facility managers and fleets together, and be able to offer a both vehicle and a charging infrastructure solution, because otherwise growth is inhibited. So we think that today we're pretty uniquely positioned, especially vis-a-vis traditional vehicle manufacturers, because we do have our traditional channels on both on the vehicle OEM side and in the world of electrical utilities and facility energy management. So I'll stop at that. Great.
Thank you, Mihai. I appreciate that. And I think this is, it's highlighting such an important piece of this discussion for us as an industry. And I think part that we need to make sure that we can explain to policymakers is about this the diversity of this segment and the fact that it's going to require new relationships among the power and infrastructure, even the, I would say, you know, the broadband infrastructure, if we can bring broadband into this. You know, just to that point, I would say, Mihai, which segments do you think are offer the greatest immediate opportunity for electrification, and how do you see, you know, electrification in those segments changing relationships with the power sector?
Well, I think it is obvious that the bus segment, be it city bus, even some form of transit beyond just the inner city, but transit in general, or school buses, there I think the value proposition exists today, right? Mm-hmm. And I think you know, Kevin was talking about the fastest adoption rates being seen in the school bus market, and there's no doubt that about that. What's driving that? It is the actual value proposition, not necessarily. I mean, saving fuel, yes, but it's sort of the broader value proposition of zero emissions, even before it is actually sort of forced by regulations. So we're seeing more and more studies on how sort of diesel is affecting the health of kids as they're being shoveled around in the conventional school buses, and thereby, you know, that's an added value proposition. But I think these segments are obviously light duty, light commercial, and medium commercial delivery vans are also close to having a value proposition actually based on safe fuel, and also compared to the increasing cost of the diesel powertrain. That's the other part. So if we compare the electrical powertrain today at low volume with diesel powertrains today at high volume, sort of the total cost of ownership, depending on circumstances, you know, probably the electrical commercial vehicle is more expensive, higher total cost of ownership than the diesel vehicle. But don't forget that increasing regulations like ultra low NOx regulations in California, now we're pretty sure that they're going to be rolled out nationwide. Same thing is happening in Europe. Same thing is happening in China. That those ultra low NOx regulations are actually increasing quite dramatically the cost of the diesel powertrain. So so as the electrical vehicles gained volume, you know, especially batteries get cheaper, you know, that's really the big one there, and the diesel powertrain gets more expensive, I think we're on the verge of flipping that ratio. Mm-hmm. However, it does depend on the segment. So yes, school buses, transit, you can also see refuse going quickly, where it starts having a positive value proposition just based on safe fuel and the cost of the powertrain, the evolving costs of the powertrain. The bigger problem, though, in the commercial vehicle space is the low mix, the high mix, low volume nature of this business. And that is that sets a crucially different dynamics than light duty vehicles, because in this high mix and low volume, other than the batteries well, they're important because they are the highest cost item, everything else takes a lot of money to customize, to optimize. And don't forget that you cannot have a one size fits all, or tell people who use these vehicles for work that they should absorb a lack of performance just to get a better cost. Mm-hmm. So again, if you look at that, then you'll see the school bus segment at, what is it, Kevin, maybe 30,000 units a year or something like that. It's a relatively large segment, self-contained. There exists a value proposition today. You're going to see growth there. Package and delivery, sort of medium duty package and delivery, another 20, 30,000 units a year. That's where you can see growth. We will see, I think, later on, for example, I mentioned refuse is a great one. That one actually probably needs help from regulations because it's a very small segment. It's 5,000 units a year, maybe altogether. Same thing with buses and coaches, relatively small segments. They need specialized solutions. It's not just enough that the battery costs go down. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you, Mihai. Kevin, can you speak to that overcoming that high mix, low value and low volume, forgive me.
Yeah.
And talk about that, how you work with your other partners in making these projects work.
Yeah, it's a challenge without question. And Mihai's right. We're about 30,000 units a year as an industry. And so these are all pre-COVID numbers. Let's be very, very clear about that. So it's 30, 35,000 units a year. And that's all types, A, C, and D across the board. So that's an issue. Our biggest issue on, bringing costs down has been just the ability to predict orders, right? And supply chain. So we'll get an order to build one electric bus 1 week, go 2 weeks, get none, then have an order to build 3 weeks, no orders. So we can't go to our supply chain and say, hey, we need 10 battery packs a week, or 20, 30, 40, plus the drivetrains. And so that's what's going to drive cost and help with the low volume situation. And that's why the legislation currently pending on Capitol Hill is so important, because that $20 billion commitment over 8 years would drive our costs down substantially, so that we would be on, we believe we could reach parity with diesel school buses within that 8-year time period. And that's not TCO parity. We're pretty much at total cost of ownership parity with diesel today when you factor in vehicle to grid. But we can probably reach parity on price within that 8-year time period. And that'll rapidly expand the adoption market. But our customers are great. We've got, the one thing that's probably a little bit different from the commercial space in terms of customers is we have parents, communities really demanding this and wanting it for students. And so that's, a little bit different twist that comes into our market right now, where we're seeing drivers, not traditionally from our traditional customer, the transportation manager at a school district, but now we're seeing the mayor, the superintendent, the PTA becoming involved, saying, hey, we want our kids on these. How do we make this happen? And fortunately, we've got great partners, as you were mentioning. The utilities we've been working with around the country have been terrific. They get it. They see school buses as kind of that leading edge, not only for electrification of transportation, but for them to figure out things that are going to impact them. Because the one good thing is we're very predictable. We know when our buses leave in the morning, we know when they come back in the morning, when they go out in the afternoon, when they're back. The 85% of the hours they sit idle. So the utilities can use that as a kind of area to figure out, okay, how do we do this? How do we charge? How do we manage charge? But we are a big draw. We're a big load. Our batteries, 155 kilowatts and up in terms of size. So, we can really put a pretty big draw on the system. And so that's why managing that becomes really critical, because you get into some school areas in the parts of the country, you're in higher elevation, houses don't even have air conditioning. So you're putting in a pretty big load when you start dropping school buses in there. So that needs to be factored in as well.
Could you just, for the folks on the call, could you sort of make an equivalency so people could understand what, 155 kilowatts looks,
Yeah, so it's like putting in, a couple of houses. It's a fairly significant draw in a very short time period too. We're working under a program now, moving up to where we'll have 120 kilowatt bidirectional charging. So we'll be able to charge that 150 pack in a little over an hour. So that's going to kind of be a critical component that'll come in there as well. Just the time, the demand type of deal. That's where we have to work again with our customers on demand charges, looking at those issues. And we have partners that work with us and our customers on that charging situation and what that could potentially mean to their utility bill and how you best manage that.
So Mihai, this sort of raises the question when you talk about this level of power demand in this segment. And I know that Eaton has done a lot of work in integrating all of those the segments, so the power and the vehicle, and looking at the role of microgrids. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, Kevin is illustrating a great point here. On the one hand, EVs are such a great opportunity of essentially replacing petroleum. That's about, our energy profile. Transportation eats or emits about, I think 28% is the number. It's the largest emitting sector in the U.S. economy, and almost all its emissions or energy consumption really comes from burning petroleum fuels today, essentially all of it. So the opportunity to decarbonize, it really means, well, we will replace petroleum by electrical power, but we're using that's a significant upgrade in generation capability and things like that, which is why this is a big deal for utilities. It is, roughly speaking, one can say that the growth opportunity here is to replace petroleum by electricity in these, when we're talking about a quarter of the total energy used in the United States. But so that's definitely, just making the energy available is an issue, and I think that the utilities have to work with the facilities to make sure that that energy is available. But then the second layer of complexity here is how you actually manage the charging. Right? So yes, you have to have the electricity, but it also has to be managed. And keep in mind that we live in a period where there's more and more shift towards renewables, and more and more, and a larger shift towards sort of distributed generation. And that's where the microgrids come in. Now that trend towards distributed generation, just to control, to give you grid resilience, to do anything starting with peak shading and ending up with frequency regulation and those type of services. That trend has been going on since before vehicle electrification became a big deal, but it is now very much accelerated and congruent with the electrification piece. So one thing is to get the megawatt power to facilities that today are using a fraction of that. And then the other piece is, how do you manage in the facility that amount of power without sort of, there's a retrofit issue, right? You simply don't have the cabling in the facilities. And going on to how do you integrate it when that megawatt of power is going to be satisfied, part of it coming from the grid, but part of it is going to be through, the local distributions and inside the facility. And that exchange, the bidirectional exchange that Kevin was talking about, that can happen with the grid itself, but can also happen at the level of the microgrid by swapping, if you wish, the sources and the electrical power sinks within the facility. That all comes under the broad term of microgrid energy management. And I think that we are sort of well positioned to expand the electrical controls, the energy controls, the sensing, the safety, even how you make these solutions, quote unquote, plug and play or easily deployable by building on top of the microgrid energy management type of experience. But it is taking it to the next level. And I'll give just a simple example. So, imagine a schoolyard today or a depot that's not really electrified. Yes, you can come with 1 megawatt electricity, from the grid in itself, not a small effort. But then you actually have to manage it and distribute it between chargers. So, solutions like having portable, if you wish, or quasi-portable charging systems where you can scale and put several chargers, perhaps at different power levels, and sort of administer them, manage them, that is very similar to microgrid management. In fact, it is a version of microgrid management where, you may or may not have local generation into it. So I think it's a whole new ball game that sits between the grid itself and, on the one hand, and the vehicles that need to be queued up for charging. That is a big growth opportunity, and I think it's frankly speaking, it's something that the government can help by investing in it, because it's not really known, and there are so many different actors. There are stakeholders in this game that makes the problem very complex.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that, and that last point particularly about the importance of government investment and the number of stakeholders. And I'll open this to Kevin and Ajay, because I know we don't have a whole bunch of time left, and I invite anyone, if people in the audience want to submit a question through the question box. So talk that this piece about the many stakeholders we've talked about. There's a lot of stakeholders in sort of the business side of this, and there's a lot of demand drivers, whether that's customers or parents or governments. But where do you see that the challenge, like in the folks that you sell that are buying the technology? Where do you think that is the challenge? Complexity? Is it cost? Is it just lack of understanding? That how do we, if CEOs get it as a branding exercise, and governments get it as a resilience exercise, how do we get the folks who are purchasing vehicles to understand the options? What are the things that we need to do better at explaining or making visible to them?
I could take part of this one, Genevieve. What we've seen and helping the folks we've helped on this journey is it's just mapping out that journey. It's like it's a very long road to get from I am operating my diesel fleet today or gas or gasoline fleet today to I want to convert all these vehicles to electric. That's a very long journey that takes into account multiple stakeholders from the producers like Mihai and Kevin for the vehicles, the infrastructure providers, the internal stakeholders within the organization. It's a huge change management exercise to get everyone on board. And then once you do that, it's the actual execution of that, of understanding which vehicles to replace when, what policies need to change internally, like things like, is there a take-home vehicle policy that may be changed? Do those folks have charging at home? It's a very complex problem that you just can't say, okay, here, go figure this out. So it takes bringing everyone to the table and involving them to really map out what that detailed plan looks like, and then having continuous involvement over the course of that period of time. And it's typically a multi-year process, just given the fact that you're replacing vehicles that have their own natural replacement cycle, and you need to align that with budgeting and other operational issues within the firms.
Thanks. Did anybody else want to weigh in there?
No, that's great.
So we have a question from the audience. Prasanna is asking from Parker Lord is asking, do we expect a lot of new market entrants in the medium and heavy duty segment based on all the movement in this segment?
Well, from Bloomberg's perspective, I will say the one, and these guys are much better answer, but we build school buses. That's what we did. But we're being approached by a lot of companies because can now do our chassis for just about anything because we can build a body around it. So that has been an interesting development, is the number of other customers who are now coming saying, hey, can you do the chassis for us and some of the body work? So yeah, we're seeing, even our little world, and I won't say little world, our world of school buses expanding potentially as well. But these guys know about who else is coming better than I would.
Well, what I can say is this, we're at the beginning of a huge disruption in the commercial vehicle space. I don't think there's any doubt about that. How the different players are going to adapt to this disruption, I think, remains to be seen. There are scenarios where large players that have good control of their supply chain, that have customer base and so forth, react quickly and adapt and win, and in fact grow their business. And there are other scenarios where some of these may be too slow to adapt and might not win. You have the scenarios where the new entrants come in and win the market. And you look at Tesla, what happened in the automotive space, and for how long people were just sort of scoffing at the Tesla as being a glorified golf cart or never going to happen and so forth, and they did it at their own peril. So that is also possible in the commercial vehicle space. But there are also many misfires, especially in the commercial vehicle space, especially because it is not well understood. So the attempt of if you look at the attempt of Silicon Valley to become a light-duty vehicle manufacturer, well, that didn't go very well, except for Tesla. When you're looking now at some of these companies that are very much technology-focused, attempt to become a commercial vehicle manufacturer, they may be getting into sort of really unknown territory. So I think it's disruption. It's an opening. It's an opening for the traditional manufacturers to reinvent themselves and become more than just a vehicle manufacturer, perhaps a vehicle and ecosystem. And that's huge growth opportunity. Mm-hmm. But with the perils of not being able to respond fast enough, it's an opening for the newcomers as well.
The only thing I'd add to that is we can't look at electrification as a silo. You have to look at the other basically mega trends in the transportation space of autonomous, connected, and shared mobility.
Thank you, and that was a great way to tie that together, Ajay. We raised a lot of really important points, and it's important. There's a lot of folks here on camera, and there's in the virtual room who are doing amazing and important work at this pivotal juncture where technology and market demands and the policy imperative are all find themselves standing at the same corner, facing in the same direction. So this is a really exciting moment that understanding how all of the stakeholders, all of the technologies and this whole value chain work together is just going to be increasingly important. So I thank you, gentlemen, so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And I would let everyone know that please plan to join us for next month's Leader Series on May 13th, where we'll be talking about specifically about the transitioning to the mobility supply chain, and that conversation is going to be led by Baker Tilly. I think registration is open now, and it is free to you. So thank you all for joining us today. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions for our guests that you didn't get to ask. And I look forward to seeing you all next month.
Thank you, Genevieve.
Thank you, Genevieve, very much. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Bye all.
Be well.